Hey guys, welcome back, it's Ripe again. In today's title story, a jealous, entitled Karen vandalizes my boat and claims that a public lake belongs to her and we must get kicked out by police. Here is what happened. And the title story starts like this. For this year's vacation, we all decided to pool in and actually buy a boat of our own. The plan was to take it to the nearby lake every summer and to keep the boat in the harbor by our city for the rest of the year. After careful research and deliberation, we settled on a sturdy and versatile boat that would serve us well both on the calm waters of the lake and in the bustling harbor near our city. We christened it the Serenity, a name that encapsulated the peace and tranquility we sought on our annual summer trips. We were never a loud bunch and we always ensured our trips were never a nuisance to the locals. Most of them were really friendly and we had a great relationship with them, so it was important for us to not disrupt their lives. Before we brought the boat to the lake, we made sure all the required permissions were taken. With a copy of the signed permit stuck to the front windshield, she was ready for her first fishing trip. All the kids were extremely excited as they brought in all their snacks and juice boxes. Their small hands clutched their fishing rods in eager anticipation of the adventures that lay ahead. Carefully, we launched the boat into the tranquil waters guided by the experienced hands of our friends. Throughout the day, we explored the hidden corners of the lake, discovering secluded bays and quiet inlets that were teeming with life. The children's eyes widened in awe as they witnessed the natural beauty that surrounded them. The Serenity carried us effortlessly, its steady presence a testament to the careful research and deliberation we had put into its selection. After we filled the bucket with the various sizes of fish we caught, we turned the boat around and headed back to the lake house. The second we stepped back onto our property, a nasty surprise awaited us. While most of the townsfolk were extremely friendly, every town had its very own Karen, and this one was no exception. This town's Karen stood on our porch looking extremely pissed off, which was weird considering we hadn't done anything at all to piss off anyone in the town. However, we had heard enough from our neighbors to know that Karen never needed a proper reason to go pick fights with people. The sight of Karen standing on our porch with a scowl etched on her face immediately dampened the joyful atmosphere that had filled our boat just moments ago. We exchanged worried glances, wondering what could have sparked her ire. With cautious steps, we docked the Serenity and made our way towards our property, acutely aware of the tension in the air. Karen, known for her confrontational nature, was notorious for picking fights without any apparent reason. Though we had always tried to maintain a harmonious relationship with the locals, it seemed that today would be a different story. As we approached the porch, Karen's eyes narrowed and her hands balled into fists. She wasted no time in launching into a tirade, spewing accusations and grievances that seemed to have little basis in reality. Her words were filled with anger and disdain, painting a distorted picture of our presence in the town. Our years of visiting the lake had been marked by respect for the community, and we had always strived to be considerate and unobtrusive. And then she finally revealed the real reason she was angry. She told us we cannot just buy a boat and use it in her lake. It was evident that her rage was fueled by jealousy. She was not the only person who owned a property by the lake, but not a boat. I kept my cool and explained to her that the lake is a public property and that we have all the required permissions to go fishing in our own boat. The calmer I stayed, the angrier she seemed to get. I asked my wife to call the cops just in case, sent all the kids inside, and took her to the boat to show her the signed permit. At this point, she completely lost it and began raging her rage out at all the fishing equipment. My heart shattered when I saw the kids' rods broken in two. I knew they would be devastated. At this point, I lost my composure and rang up the police once more. When she finally realized what was happening, she apologized and begged me not to call the cops on her. I just ignored her and proceeded to explain how she not only trespassed onto my property, but also caused major damage to my equipment and boat, which was extremely expensive. When I refused to listen to her pleas, she resumed being angry. She also called the cops and claimed that I was at her private lake and refused to leave. Her false claims were ironic considering that she was the one who was on my property uninvited. When the cops arrived, her demeanor completely changed and she began playing the victim card. But this did not change the fact that all her claims were invalid and the lake was in fact public property. It was obvious that Karen had damaged the boat and the equipment. The officers immediately knew who was at fault here. As Karen realized the gravity of her actions, desperation replaced her anger. She pleaded for mercy, offering apologies tinged with regret. However, I maintained my resolve, explaining that her behavior had crossed a line and necessitated legal intervention. It was crucial to hold her accountable not only for the damage she had caused, but also for the importance of respecting boundaries and the rights of others. I knew all her promises of reimbursing the equipment she broke, paying for the damages she caused to my boat, were all lies to avoid a registered case against her. She was not the type of woman who keeps her word. We went on to press charges so we could properly sue her for not only damaging our property, but also ruining our vacation. Ultimately, she got arrested for trespassing and vandalism. She also had to pay us $10,000 for the damages caused. It was not an easy process and it was awfully time-consuming, but it was important that she learned of the consequences of her actions. It was so evident that she never had to face any legal repercussions before, which is what allowed her entitlement to grow to this height. And the next one is an absolutely amazing XXL revenge story, but since it is so long, you might want to take out some popcorn. Anyway, it starts like this. I've worked in marketing for 7 years since I graduated college. That entire time I've worked for one company. I haven't been the best employee, but I've been nowhere near the worst either. Middle of the pack, just where I like it. I don't make waves or bring attention to myself, I just do my job and I go home. I am one of only 3 females in a male-dominated department of about 15. My job basically entails courting big brands into choosing our agency to create their advertising campaigns. Lots of spreadsheet work, profit projections, boring stuff for people not in the industry. And well, I was in the industry and I am bored just typing a general description of it. The entire time I was with the company, Dan was my boss. Dan is a mid-level manager who reports to the vice president of the entire company. There are 5 other Dans in the office, all of whom run their own departments, handling their own big clients. Dan is the typical former high school or college jock who never made it to the pros, so he takes out his aggression in the office. In some instances, aggression in the office can be a good thing, all that testosterone driving towards success. But in Dan's case, it just made him a jerk. Like I said, I was middle of the pack my whole career. I never aspired to get promoted, but over the years I noticed Dan promote all sorts of people around me. For those who clearly did more and better work, it made perfect sense. There have been some total losers in my department over the years though, and seeing them get promoted was kind of funny. Like I said, I wasn't ambitious, just did my job, so I did not resent those employees who were not as good as me earning more. What I did resent was getting blamed for their mistakes or being used as a scapegoat if our department did not secure as large a contract as we wanted. For example, our partnership with X brand might be for a whole year at a certain price, whereas our company wanted 2 years at a higher price like some other departments got with their clients. If I did something mostly on my own, Dan made sure credit was shared with the whole department. That's cool. But if the entire team did not do so well, he would single me out or single out some other poor schmuck to take the rap for the whole thing. Dan would then write an after-action report where that person got the lion's share of the blame and eventually got fired. Whether our team exceeded its goal or not, Dan would make sure he and his favorites got fat bonuses. One thing Dan believed in was going out on team-building lunches. At these lunches, the team made sure to be on our guard. Only 1 drink apiece, watch your tongue, that sort of thing. But Dan would always get roaring drunk and would say all kinds of non-PC stuff. Dan's favorite thing was guy jokes. I mean, guy humor. The other 2 girls in our department seemed to like that sort of thing and didn't mind. I minded, but I kept my big mouth shut because I didn't want to cause any trouble. Well, eventually, a friend of mine from another department came to me and he told me that he overheard Dan and my friend's supervisor, talking about who was on the chopping block next. Evidently, my friend was about to get fired and I was about to get fired too. My friend tells me he heard Dan saying that he would fire me after I made sure to make him look good at the next presentation we were making for a prospective client, a huge brand from Asia. The presentation would be in a month. My firing would be a week after that, and then Dan would hire a friend of his just out of college to take my place. I trust this friend because he's been with the company as long as me, and we bonded early over our love for Buffy the Vampire Slayer. I geek out over that show even though it's slightly before my time. We would talk all the time about how hot some of the guys on that show were. Well, anyway, until my firing, I was to continue slaving away, collecting marketing reports, whining and dining the clients, being charming, and prepping Dan's PowerPoint presentation to the clients. I got a good friend in HR, and on a lunch date a few days later, she told me that it was true. I was one of the names submitted by Dan for termination in the near future. She swore me to secrecy, and I promised I wouldn't say a word, but I also made her promise that she wouldn't say a word about what I was planning. I remember how much of a jerk Dan was, in that he wouldn't even let me take my 2 weeks off to get married 2 years ago, even though I requested it several months in advance, without making me feel like a lazy jerk. Meanwhile, he would sign off on his buddy's vacation requests without batting an eye, even if they would come to him last minute. He has always been a jerk to me, and part of me suspects it might be because I never took him up on his offer to take me out after work or chat me up on a personal level from years ago before I got married. I had just realized I was pregnant with my first kid when I dreaded eventually having to ask Dan for my maternity leave. This job really was not making me a happy person anyway, and my husband makes a fine salary and has always told me it's perfectly fine for me to take time off to be a stay-at-home mom for a few years or even permanently if I want. Well, I've always done my job effectively, done well on performance reviews, never off the charts good, but always well above effective rating. Even when Dan, the failed tight end, was reviewing me, he had to play nice because an HR rep would be in the room. Growing up with 2 a-hole brothers who are now wonderful people, one teaches high school English and the other is a chemist, I knew a lot about the classic mousetrap stink bomb trick. The one where you superglue a stink bomb ampule to the cheese area of a mousetrap and set the mousetrap so that when the trap is triggered, it crushes the ampule and releases the fart and rotten egg smell. You glue the mousetrap itself to the bottom of a small oblong box, usually a shoebox. The trap is glued on one end of the box's inside, on the other side you put a tennis ball and then you seal the box. You make sure that for storage the ball stands in a tall way with the ball on the bottom and the trap on the top. When you're ready to use the stink bomb, you lay the box gently the long way so that the ball gently rolls along the bottom of the box near the mousetrap. The idea is that if the box is jarred, the ball will move around, trigger the trap, and then you get the stink bomb smell. My brother told me it's usually for putting in people's cars, that once the cars started moving, the natural momentum would spring the trap. My plan didn't involve cars, but the trap would still be fine. I decided that I would ruin Dan's presentation with a stink bomb. That would be annoying, but it wouldn't really be revenge for 7 years of him treating me like crap and making me do all this work that ultimately he took credit for. And then gave himself raises for. So for the next 4 weeks, 3 times a week, Dan and our entire team would be that obnoxious group of office workers you see at Chili's or Red Robin or whatever mid-price sit-down restaurant you have near you that's a step up from Denny's. And of course, per usual, Dan would talk about what loser people in other departments were and how the company was nothing without him, how the boss's new wife was hotter than the previous wife and how he made both of them happy. We all knew he was just messing around and bro-talking, whatever he was doing with all his drunk talk. I thought maybe upper management would be a better judge than me. I thought of just emailing the best audio files to them. And well, I didn't mention before, but I had gotten into a habit these last few weeks of quietly hitting record audio whenever Dan decided to tell off-color jokes, sex jokes, or make fun of differences between black and white people, how funny it sounds when Asian people speak English, and so on. My friend from another department who was also on the verge of getting fired helped me change a lot of the audio files on Dan's upcoming video presentation to his most classic sounding soundbites of making fun of Asian people, black people, telling sex jokes, etc. The visuals stayed the same, but the audio track was completely changed. Officially, Dan's dull-witted friend was in charge of creating the presentation, and he and Dan would take credit for the whole thing. The reality was that I was supposed to create the whole thing, make it a smash hit, and get fired without getting any credit for it. Every day I was supposed to submit my work to Dan and his friend, and they were supposed to give their okay on my work. But over time they realized I produced good work and they didn't even bother checking what I was doing. They did, however, send their confirmation to their bosses that they were completing their presentation. Since they didn't want to share credit with me, they excluded my name from their reports. Our presentation room for the client is about the size of a classroom. It's basically like a private theater in a mansion. Our clients were about a dozen Japanese men. There is a movie screen on one end with a podium beside it. Dan was supposed to make a speech at the podium and then show how approachable and cool he is by pacing up and down the stage in front of the screen to really sell our agency's services and then take a seat while the video climaxes the show. The video is projected from behind a glass room, like a movie theater in back, and a projector is connected to a laptop beside it. The projector shows its image through a glass window. That projector room has one door accessible from inside the theater, and it has a deadbolt lock, though it's never locked. Another door leads to the rest of the building. We are on the 8th floor. Only the custodian has the key. Dan had a remote control where he would click a button and the presentation would start. Without Dan knowing, I had the projector changed to a different model that wouldn't read his remote but the remote I was holding. There were like 5 different projectors available on the projector room. The plan was supposed to be that Dan would press his button, the video would play its 3-minute length, and that would end our pitch to the client. My plan was that I would press my own remote at the same time as Dan. Well, Dan goes through his nauseating presentation, really kissing a lot of butt, and the clients are watching him speak. He finishes his pitch and then on cue, pressing his button. As I planned, I press my button. Oh, I ought to have mentioned before, but I had got my hands on a copy of the custodian's key without anyone's knowledge, and I deadbolted the projection room door. The first minute of the presentation goes as planned, the correct audio playing about how our company is so wonderful. Dan is lulled into security and relaxes at his seat. Then the fun part of the audio starts, where Dan tells a lot of racist jokes, makes fun of how Asians talk, how he screwed the boss's wife, how the company was worthless, and how he was the best employee. Dan panicked, practically screaming. He runs to the projection room only to find it locked. The whole team, especially Dan and the doofus who claim credit for my presentation, are wondering what to do. They are trying to usher our Asian guests out of the room, but oh no. They find it fascinating. Oh my god, just when things couldn't seem to get any worse, I opened my briefcase that I've been carefully carrying around like an egg. I made sure not to actually set the mousetrap until I was in the room earlier during the meeting. While Dan was droning on, I opened the box in the darkened room, pulled back the mousetrap, closed the box and waited. And now was my chance. With Dan and his crash test dummy friend now screaming for something heavy to break the projection room window, I kicked the box down the slanted theater floor. Only seconds later, the entire room fills with a horrible stench of fart and eggs. The video is over anyway, and everyone rushes out of the room during the confusion. But not before Dan threw a chair through the window and broke a $4,000 company laptop. Understandably, everyone in the office was wondering what the hell happened in the conference theater. The Japanese businessmen were livid and complaining to the big boss about having their time wasted by a recording of Dan being racist towards them, and of course bragging about how he had sex with the boss's wife. They then left and took their business elsewhere. Dan was immediately called in, together with his underling. In the presence of an HR rep, they of course instantly tried to blame me for the whole fiasco. The boss then asked them, according to my HR friend, "Why are you trying to pin this on OP? Every day for the last 3 weeks, you and Crash Test Dummy Minion have submitted reports saying only you two were working on the video presentation that was supposed to cap off the show. Are you admitting to fraud?" Needless to say, both of those losers were fired. One by one, my whole department was called into the HR office with the main boss to be interviewed separately. Including me, of course. We all said we had no idea what all of that was about. Everyone admitted that the audio recordings which survived the broken laptop screen were genuine, but no one could place who recorded them. All we knew was that one of us did it. The 13 of us who remained, 10 guys, 3 women, were in a group interview with the boss, and he thanked us for exposing Dan and his main underling. He told us that he wished we did it in a more constructive way, but that it was a positive thing that Dan was exposed for costing the company business. We were all to be given raises. In the general aftermath of everything, no one really asked about the stink bomb. The custodian simply cleaned up the discarded box later that day and no one mentioned it. Custodian's cool and knows how not to be a narc. He took back his key, no questions asked. I really think the stink bomb was not necessary to get Dan fired though. I just thought it would make his destruction more funny. My new supervisor is a much nicer guy. He hired my friend from the other department to join his after I resigned. HR told me that they were let them lay me off, I could collect 6 months of unemployment. I of course took it because I don't think I'll work in that field again, but in case I do, I got letters of recommendation from the boss and new supervisor. Dan of course knew it was me who sabotaged his career. He has seen me around town before and knows I go to this cafe not far from where I live. One day, about 3 months after it happened, he saw me sitting at a table alone. He came up to me looking like his failed jock self and said, "You think you're pretty smart, don't you, you effing bee?" Then he started to approach me like he was gonna use his physicality to intimidate me. There were lots of witnesses, mostly elderly. Luckily for me, my husband came out of the bathroom just in time to see another man looking like he was threatening me. Happy ending, Dan had a broken nose, and no, I'm not gonna press charges, officer. 200-foot restraining order though? Yes, 7 senior citizens stayed behind to tell the police a husband, himself a former football jock, but now a quiet research scientist, was defending his wife. Give it up, Dan, you lose. And yeah, Ripe stars, I gotta say, I am not jealous of OP for being in such a terrible work environment, but I am jealous of OP for coming up with such an amazing revenge. Honestly, to come up with a plan like this, you have to be a genius. I would say this is so good that it probably could be on Netflix. Absolutely amazing story. And with this, we have reached the end of the video. However, if you cannot get enough of my content, please check out my endless playlist, where you can find thousands of hours of content. In addition, please don't forget to subscribe to my channel to not miss any of my daily uploads. Thank you so much in advance, and I hope to see you again tomorrow.